Bonjour and good morning and good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're calling in from today. My name is Robin Ludy. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the chair of the Professional Development Committee with CEWIL Canada. I am also the manager of workplace learning at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver campus, and I'm really looking forward to hosting this final installment of CEWIL's Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Work Integrated Learning series. I'm also a grateful guest living, learning, and working on the unceded traditional and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And knowing that we're all calling in from different places and spaces today, I would like to take the time to acknowledge the original owners, stewards, and caretakers of Turtle Island and the lands upon which we gather on. Acknowledging the stolen land that we're on is critical to grounding ourselves in these conversations around equity, diversity, and inclusion, as it's important to remind ourselves the extensive history of inequities and injustices that are represented by the land that supports the work that we all work to facilitate. If you don't know the land, the Indigenous territories of the lands upon which you are located, we encourage you to check out this link here, and maybe I'll ask for it to be put in the chat, that allows you to locate yourself on the land. It does have inaccuracies, however, it is a starting point and a guide for us to begin to situate ourselves. As is typical in these sessions, by way of introducing ourselves to each other and everyone here on the call, if you can please say hello by entering your name, institution, organization, and the Indigenous territories that you are on in the chat. We'll take a few minutes to have that the cascade and waterfall of names and territories in the chat. So I'll let everyone on the call enter that in now. As those continue to come in, I will review a few administrative items before we get started, although by now I'm sure many of us are familiar and pros at Zoom etiquette in these types of sessions. I will stop sharing my screen with these PowerPoint slides once we introduce our speakers so you can see their face, and at the top right-hand corner of your screen, you can adjust the view settings to your liking. Thank you for your feedback in the last session. When I don't share my screen, you can actually get a bigger visual of the panelists' faces. So we will be doing that today. We will be recording this session, and the link will be made accessible to the public on CEWIL's website and emailed to everyone who registered for this session. If you experience any technical issues in today's session, please direct those to the chat function. My colleague, Tracy Horn from the CEWIL PD committee will be able to help you, as well Andrew from CEWIL Canada is also here to help us with any technical issues. We will be making use of the question and answer feature in Zoom located at the bottom of your screen for the remaining 10 minutes of the session. So as panelists are speaking and sharing their experiences, if questions come up that you want to ask them, please put them in the Q&A function, and Tracy will be curating a list for questions in the last 10 minutes of the session to ask our panelists. I'll take a breather just to thank you for entering in who you are and the Indigenous territories that you're calling from. Welcome. We'll let those keep coming in, and I'll keep us on time here. So this series around equity, diversity, and inclusion comes at a time of global conversation, but is definitely not a new one. It's critical now more than ever for us to not only listen and learn from voices that are often silenced, but lean into the discomfort that often emerges from these discussions and start taking actionable steps forward. As a cisgendered white woman, I want to acknowledge the incredibly privileged perspective that I bring into this space and hope to unlearn and relearn alongside many of you in this series and in this session today and moving forward. I hope that we can use our collective power and privilege in our own institutions and organizations, but also together with CEWIL to do the work that needs to be done to dismantle systemic barriers that are experienced by so many and create greater access to more inclusive and equitable experiences for everybody. I am joined today by 4 panelists from organizations across the country who are going to share their experiences around equity, diversity, and inclusion and work integrated learning and how their respective organizations are tackling these efforts. While we are focused on our own work and work-integrated learning, I want to acknowledge the intersectional aspect of our identities and invite our panelists today to bring in and speak to any of their experiences around equity, diversity, and inclusion as it intersects with who they are and any of the spaces that they may find themselves. On that note, I would like to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, moving from the East Coast to the West Coast with some gray area in between because we have panelists living in the same areas. So I will stop sharing my screen here so that you can see them. I think that I did that correctly. And we will start with Mohammed. You're on mute, Mohammed. There you go.
Thank you, Robin, for inviting me, and thank you, CEWIL, for inviting me to speak on this panel today. I'm really passionate about this topic, but before I start, I always do this. I always acknowledge, I'd like to first acknowledge that I am on the traditional and ancestral lands and unceded territories of the Wolastoq, the Maliseet, the Mi'kmaq, and the Passamaquoddy First Nation people. I would also like to acknowledge that all other unceded First Nations and ancestral lands across this great country that we call Canada, and wish to conform to the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, for which I will work hard to establish in my daily life. We cannot speak about equity, diversity, and inclusion without accepting the wrongs that have been made, and we must reconcile with ourselves first and those who have been wronged. So with that note, I would like to say my name is Mohammed Baga. I'm from St. John, from the beautiful East Coast in St. John, New Brunswick, right on the Atlantic Ocean. I am the managing director of the St. John Newcomer Center. I have provided CEWIL a link to a video which you can watch about our organization. But briefly speaking, the St. John Newcomer Center is an immigrant settlement service provider with a mission to improve the cultural, social, and economic well-being of our community through the promotion of multiculturalism and support to newcomer settlement in the St. John region. So what is my motivation of being here today? First, I'm a racialized person of color who truly believes that everybody should have an equal chance, that nobody should be judged by the color of the skin. Instead, they should be judged by the content of their character, as famously said by Martin Luther King Jr. By the way, Martin Luther King Jr. Day was yesterday, January the 18th. So we should take that seriously. Secondly, I also believe that diversity adds to the richness of life of everyone and touches every place in a very positive way, enriching experiences, which creates cultural understanding, increases awareness of similarities, and where differences can be celebrated together. After all, isn't it what diversity defines us as a country in Canada? All of us have immigrated from somewhere, bringing cultures, our different dimensions of cultures, our dresses, our dances, our cuisines that form the mosaic that we all love today. And lastly, that it is simply wrong to leave somebody out. Imagine if you are the one who was left out. It is simply inhumane, it is shameful, and I would even say disgusting to feel that if you're not included, both the person or the institution that creates the barrier for this inclusion, doesn't benefit from it. Simply, let's put it this way. The oxygen we breathe does not discriminate. The water we need to survive on does not discriminate, nor this awful pandemic that has just come upon us hasn't found a way to discriminate either. So why should I, you, or we discriminate? And these are the motivations for today, for being here today to talk about EDI and its values that I truly believe in. Thank you, Robin.
Thanks, Mohammed. Powerful opening and introduction. Amanda, I think, is next, moving across the country.
Thank you. Thanks, Robin, and thanks to all my panelists. I'm happy to be here with all of you. My name is Amanda Stevens, and I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And I'm in Toronto, formerly known as Takaronto, and I acknowledge that Today, there are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people living in Toronto and across all of Turtle Island. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're all treaty peoples as either migrants, whether it's in this generation or in previous generations, including those who've been forcibly brought to Canada through the transatlantic slave trade. So I want to pay tribute to all of that. And in that context, I'd like to acknowledge that I am a white settler and first generation Canadian with parents who were able to choose Canada as a destination. And I have to reconcile the background of British colonizer on one side and Jewish family forcibly displaced in recent generations from their lands. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the Director of Learning and Culture with the People and Culture team and part of the senior management team at United Way Greater Toronto with a staff of about 200 people. And I'm very committed to our mission, and I've been very committed to the initiatives that I've been able to support around building an inclusive culture. And it's foundational to United Way because we're focused on both meeting urgent needs in our fight against local poverty and create long-lasting and systemic change based on and addressing things like inequality related to income, to race, to geography, and more. And especially, as Mohammed brought up, in the context of COVID-19, those differences and inequalities are more obvious than ever. So I'm really excited to be here. I've been with United Way for about 10 years. And as you can see, I kind of provided my sites of privilege in where I get to sit doing this work. And I'm hyper conscious of that and trying really hard to address the blind spots that I have in order to create a more inclusive culture, to enable our staff team to actually build more equitable communities.
Thanks, Amanda. I think we're moving into the west. So let me see, Jiri.
Mute is off. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Good morning, because I'm in BC, and good afternoon for the rest of you back east. My name is Jerry Contelati, and I am, because as most of us who are actually privileged to be working from home, which a lot of people are not privileged because of COVID, I am working from home today, and I come to you. I acknowledge that I am gathered in the Coast Salish territory, represented today by the Ketsi and the Kwantlen First Nations. They've been custodians of this land for thousands of years, and I'd like to pay my respect to the elders, both past and present. I do go by she, her, and as my pronouns, and I come from Kenya. I was born in Kenya. I came to Canada to go to university, and went to university in Manitoba, which is, I hope there's somebody from University of Manitoba on the line. And so, as you can imagine, it's been a journey. I've been with Vancity for 25 years, and just really privileged to work for an organization like Vancity. Vancity is a credit union. It's a financial cooperative. It is a values-based financial cooperative that started in 1946. And a cooperative is an organization that's owned by its members. And so as a financial cooperative, it means that all our decisions are democratic, and they're all focused on our membership. We give back in our local communities. So one call of action from me to everybody would be, you should be supporting your local credit union, because the credit unions give back to their local communities, and they don't have shareholders in some stock market in New York. So that's just my one little call. The work that I do at Vancity, I actually, I work in community investment, and community investment is a department that is what we bridge between community needs and the resources of the credit union. So that being said, is we do have, we call it boots on the ground, knowing what the community needs are. And when the community needs are aligned with our focus, we will support them through our granting program. We have what we call shared success, where 30% of our profits go back to our communities. And the department that I work for is the one that manages and coordinates the shared success. So just to kind of just talk about why am I on this panel? I think diversity and inclusion is a really, really definitely important issue. In a workplace like Van City, it's really important because we've had diversity and inclusion as part of our mandate forever. But I have to say in the last year, I've actually seen it coming to life. It took a huge event to finally bring this into the forefront and people to have conversations about it, and without being uncomfortable, because it's the comfort level, and we're having really great conversations, and we're content to being uncomfortable, but we are actually being comfortable the more we talk about it. I'm part of our employee resource group for racialized staff, so we really talk about, and it's almost been like a support group. And so people really come and talk about their experiences, and we have really great support from our organization when we talk about where we'd like to see changes, and they've been very committed to it. In the last year, we've had 3 town halls where we've had over 1,000 staff attend our town halls, where we've talked about the most deep and sensitive issues that we have seen from internally, from our own staff, and externally from our membership. And we've made a lot of big decisions around zero tolerance, not allowing members to treat us in a discriminatory way. And so we've had a lot of changes happen last year because of bringing diversity and inclusion in the forefront. So as an organization, we are looking internally at ourselves, because we have to change us before we can change the world. And but I feel like we're in the right path, we're moving in the right direction, and I'm really excited to be here. There's a lot we do with universities. I do a lot of funding to different university groups. We do a lot of financial literacy with university groups, and I know I'm not in HR, but I know I do work very closely with HR. Whenever we get our internship program, we always have an internship program where we have a diverse, amazing group of students that come and are part of our workforce. We have had, I have to say, every year we'll have 20 interns that come in, and maybe up to 15 of them will end up staying with the organization and working and really having meaningful work with the organization, which I am so proud of when I see that. So the last time we had one was in 2019. We are hoping in 2020 we will, because 2021 we will see something happening with the internship, because that's such a great group of students that we have been engaged with and continue to be engaged with. So I think I'll just stop there. And so thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm so excited to be part of this.
So happy to have you, Jerry. And finally, Nicole.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nicole Coleman. I would like to acknowledge I work, play, and live on the unceded and traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. My pronouns are she, her, and I am an audit partner with Deloitte here in Vancouver. Deloitte is the largest professional services firm in Canada, and we employ over 8,000 people. But I'm really excited to be here today to share with you, because Deloitte's inclusion journey started over 20 years ago. I've been with the firm for over 20 years, so I've been part of that journey. And I want to share with you today where we've been successful and what our current objectives are, because there's quite a lot of them and some really good thoughts. But I, personally, as a leader with Deloitte, I look forward to learning. I'm on my own personal journey, and I'm very excited to be part of this panel and look forward to the discussions.
Great. Well, welcome to you all, and thank you all so much for the time and commitment and sharing your experiences and the work that you do within your organizations with our national audience here today. We have 3 broad questions. Oh, I just saw, what about Tracy? Tracy Horn is a member of the Professional Development Committee with CEWIL, and Tracy, go for it. Say hello.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I'm Tracy. I'm working with Robin on the CEWIL committee for PD, and we are so excited to have everyone here today. I'm joining from Lethbridge, Alberta, from traditional Blackfoot territory. So go ahead, Robin.
And Tracy is helping us manage our Q&A and our chat function. So we have 3 broad questions that our panelists will respond to. Given some time constraints and making sure that we have 10 minutes to respond to any questions that you may have, we might, not every panelist may not respond to every question. So I'm just going to put that out there. And the first question is, how are you individually supporting initiatives around equity, diversity, and inclusion within your role at your organization? And how is your organization supporting these initiatives more broadly? So I'll turn it over to Mohammed to respond to that question first, and I'll put the question in the chat for those of you that might have missed it.
Thank you, Robin, again. So I am really proud to fulfill the mission of our organization, as I mentioned earlier, to improve the social, cultural, and economic well-being of all people of all color. So first, I would like to say that I have advocated for and continue to advocate and have helped in the development of stringent hiring practices and that provides everyone an equal shot to gainfully be employed within our organization, regardless of the skin color, race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, or disability. In fact, our organization has more people working with at least one of those characteristics I just said. I've also worked hard to develop inclusive policies, both internally and working with newcomers to Canada, so everyone feels like they are part of one big family. Like the St. John Newcomer Center is the most diverse organization in the city of St. John, probably in the whole of New Brunswick. There's no staff that had repeated from a country, including Canada. So all the staff were from another country, and all of us spoke multiple languages for a small organization like ours with approximately anywhere between 12 and 20 staff. So I'm really proud of that, and it is because of our hiring practices, which I've been a big part of. Another fact is that we have worked with many organizations like the Diversity Institute in Toronto and Ryerson University to procure job matching softwares that helped hire for equity, diversity, and inclusion, that we promoted in our community among our employers so that employers could benefit from higher hiring from diversity. I've also advocated in the business community on the importance of hiring for diversity. There's a quick, let's just talk about a fact. According to the Progress Career Planning Institute, Canada loses anywhere from $3 billion to $5 billion by not hiring thousands of internationally trained professionals. Isn't that a no-brainer? It really puzzles me as well to see this much of equity is just lost because we don't hire for diversity. Our organization continues to develop cultural competency training and cultural sensitivity trainings that we have extended to the business community that helps them to be more aware of what they are missing. Recently, we provided this training to government officials responsible for working with employers, as well as the labor market impact in our province. We truly believe that the tides are turning in New Brunswick, and we really and we are ready, especially in New Brunswick, because it's not only an economic argument. 120,000 people are going to, or nearly a third of our workforce is going to retire by 2029, which is where will we get all the people when there's only around 70,000 people who are going to be coming back, who are going to graduate from our schools. Our education system is not really ready to welcome to graduate 120,000. Our population is aging. They are past their birth rates. So where will we get the people from? And most of the youth we have seen from the past 10 years, there's a lot of out migration that is happening to large cities like Toronto. So we are losing youth. We don't have enough youth to graduate from our schools and universities, and we'll lose 120,000 people. We'll either shrink or we have to find a solution. So, we could see this prior to the pandemic, such effects like signs of help in front of windows in our community, and jobs that were going vacant for long periods of time. Some businesses also threatened went to newspapers and threatened to shut down because they could just not find any employees to work for them. So while others took a step forward and planned and aggressively started to hire internationally, many businesses have reached out to our organization for settlement planning processes. Others have reached out to us as well, scrambling to find talent. If we don't do anything, then we suddenly are in the verge of shrinking. This is not only an economic argument, again, I say, it's also a demographic argument and a social argument. And I'll give you an example. With an aging population, our low birth rate, low participation rate, and low unemployment rate, who will take care of our parents and grandparents? Everybody of us is aging. Most of our parents and grandparents in the next 10 years are going to be in nursing homes. And yet we don't have we don't have the talent to take care of them, or we don't have enough manpower here. So, or they require home care, or they require extra medical care, home visitations, hospitals, and much more. There's a lot more that would be required. See, I don't have an answer for that, other than we need to embrace diversity. We need to create an environment of equity, and we need to be more inclusive for us to succeed. Thank you, Robin.
Thanks, Mohammed. I'm going to turn it over to Amanda and then Nicole to respond to that question.
Thanks, Robin. And I just want to add on to what Jerry was saying earlier around the kind of meaningfulness of their journey, and the pivot points of the last year have really had a similar impact on our organization, as well as so many others. So in my work in the People and Culture team, I work closely with an infrastructure of a diversity and inclusion committee across the organization, as well as closely with an Indigenous collaboration lead. So it's a dedicated person who's leading a strategic work on reconciliation related to our work at United Way. And I should mention that we do in Toronto, in the GTA, because it's not just Toronto, it's Toronto, York Region, and Peel Region. So the GTA, we invest about $100 million a year into a social service, a network of social service agencies. But internally, because most of my work is internally to enable the staff team to do their great work, I would say that after an intentional 10-year journey, I wish I could say it was 20 years, like Nicole, on diversity and inclusion, and it was diversity and inclusion, and we do 2-year surveys every year, or every 2 years we do surveys to surface what the issues were. We were making tremendous progress over those 10 years, but it's brought us to this pivot point where now we're focused on equity and anti-oppression. And we already knew that anti-oppression and equity were going to be issues we needed to pay more attention to. And with our most recent survey, we, for the first time, differentiated responses from employees who identified as Black, knowing that we were already asking people to identify as racialized, but this time we really identified our Black colleagues to see what are the systemic anti-Black racism issues that we need to surface so that we can actually address head on. So we're still absorbing those results, but certainly what we've seen is a drop because of the societal, well, there's so many factors. I don't want to guess at what all of the factors are, but it's the pivot point of we need to pay more attention and do better to be more inclusive and bring greater equity. And personally, I feel a huge responsibility in that to my colleagues, but also because $100 million is a lot of money to invest, and we should be investing that with that equity mindedness. So we're on a very intentional learning journey internally. We've committed to equity that are much broader than we've ever done before. And so to Jerry's point, like way more meaningful conversations. If they are uncomfortable, I wish we could say we're comfortable in the discomfort, but we're not there yet. And it's around building equity mindedness, but a really strong understanding of anti-oppression, white supremacy. It's bringing up issues of, everyone's being asked to dig deep personally on what their sites of privilege and oppression are and all of the intersections in between. And that can be traumatic, and it brings up issues related to fragility or internalized oppression. And so we're really reflecting on how we're all complicit in colonization and in white supremacy, and how to solve with that. So how do we dismantle oppression, getting our own house in order so that we can more effectively work with community for better outcomes. So that means even our board is participating. All of our board members and board committee members are participating. We're doing mandatory training for all. We are continuing to advance our work on Indigenous reconciliation in tandem with our equity work, because we do feel it's important to separately acknowledge the unique historical and systemic damage, and take steps to repair that damage. So one of the really interesting things that we've been doing now that will have a greater impact on the future, and not just for United Way in Greater Toronto, is we've been working with a framework, an equity framework that was developed by United Way Worldwide, and we've adapted it for the Canadian context, that really looks to transform work on equity from different vantage points, from different levers, where that affects a number of different approaches to the work. So whether that's internal and you're looking at different recruitment practices, data, so you're actually collecting donor demographics and looking to diversify a donor base. But more importantly, also looking at what social identities, we're actually doing a social identity project with the Toronto Central Lens to look at social identity, and the City of Toronto as well, sorry, to look at social identity and how it impacts the experience of people in interacting with social services, to see how we can better leverage things like data. So there's a lot more that we're doing, but this equity framework looks at 7 different levers to make really systemic change for more equitable communities. If there's time, I can add more detail to that, but I want to give everybody the opportunity to speak.
Thanks, Amanda. Appreciate, the deepening of the conversation from diversity and inclusion to equity as well. It's so much more than getting diverse humans into organizations, but how do you continue to ensure that they're, engaged in respectful and inclusive ways? And so that internal looking at infrastructure and practices with that equity lens, I think is really important, because we need to ensure that once they're here and in the organizations, that they're respected and included and have equal access to promotions and opportunities and things like that. So I appreciate that. Nicole, and then Jiri.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Mohammed and Amanda both had a lot of really good things to say. I will echo, this past year has created a different conversation. I'm really proud of our firm to take decisive action and shift our internal culture and influence. And it has been a 20-year journey to this point, but there's still so much work to do, right? We're just not there. But the conversations are happening, and like Jerry said, that there's an element of uncomfortableness in that, but we have, as leaders, to challenge ourselves to have those uncomfortable conversations. They're really important. So I think we would acknowledge that diversity and inclusion includes so much more than ethnicity and gender. We also look at other marginalized groups, LGBTQ communities and persons with disabilities, just to name a few. Deloitte has 3 current priorities right now in our diversity and inclusion agenda. Number 1 is to achieve gender equality. So we're still not there in professional services. Our goal is to have at least 40% of women in leadership roles. We're currently at the partnership only at 31% over a 20-year journey. So it's a long road. There's been a lot of improvements, but it's still a focus of the firm. Number 2 is to have a firm whose makeup really mirrors the contemporary society of Canada. So we have a lot of representation of a lot of diverse groups, but we fully acknowledge that our representation of the Black, Indigenous, and people with disability groups lags what the national average is, and that's definitely acknowledged and tracked. And there's a priority there to make a difference. And the third one is to really truly achieve an equitable and inclusive workplace. And again, there's a number of initiatives underneath each of these, but it would be things like developing and training our inclusive leaders. We have a goal of 100% participation of our inclusion learnings right now. It's taken very seriously, and I think people are very passionate about making that happen. Ensuring our internal systems and processes are inclusive and equitable. So that would include things like equity and promotion, time and role, pay equity, turnover, recruiting with an inclusion lens are all being a big focus of what we're doing. And the other thing I would mention is advancing diversity and inclusion in the marketplace with our clients and our community through thought leadership and different publications, conversations like we're having today, just to make sure that we understand we're learning at the same time, but that we're also helping advance the learning out there.
Thanks, Nicole. Jerry?
Yes, I'll unmute myself. The question, it's been so interesting listening to everybody, and I'm thinking, yeah, we are doing that. We want to do that too. So I won't take long. And I agree that this has been a year, well, 2020 was a year of reckoning for a lot of things, but around racial and anti-racism, it's been a big issue everywhere, and with our organization we are very, very similar to everybody else. But the question is, what are we going to do about it? We've had, as I told you, we've had the town halls. We have actually been having very honest conversations between staff and senior leadership. And talking about women in leadership, we just got a new CEO yesterday, confirmed. And woman, so I think we are continuing that commitment to representation quite well. So, and our board is quite a few women on the board too. But just going back to my role, how individually I support initiatives around equity and diversity, because as I said, I am in community investment. So what we are trying to do is looking at the way we do our funding process, because as a funder, you are really in a position of power, and you really have to be thoughtful in the way you are funding, and really ensure that the funding is going to the right project. So one of the things we did with Indigenous groups was we will only fund groups that are Indigenous led. So we will not fund groups that are have other people leading and have Indigenous programming. So Indigenous led has always been our focus when we are funding around Indigenous, and reconciliation is actually one of our core values. We've included reconciliation as one of our core values too. And the other thing we have is now we are looking at how to implement safeguards on removing bias in our decision making with funding requests. Because we do tend to fund sometimes the same organizations over and over, and really drilling down to ensure that we are meeting those, the organizations that we really want to support, and their values are very aligned with our values right now. So so those are the kind of things from my role that we are looking at. We are very focused in, because we don't have deep pockets, we have three we have three focused areas. We have economic inclusion and social justice, environmental sustainability, and the co-op economy. So those are the three focus areas that we focus on, and we actually don't deviate from that. We will not fund health programs, we will not, so we will always be focused on that. So with that in mind, we know that economic inclusion and social justice, there's a lot of racialized and Indigenous and organizations that we can support around that. So we are, and that's our focus for 2021. And we have supported a lot of different organizations, but we really want to build networks that are more inclusive, have make our decisions in a democratic way with the community, and just ensure that we are meeting the needs where they are at. And how is our organization supporting more broadly, as we were talking about, is well, first of all, Vancity is one of the few partners that have signed up for the Black Entrepreneurship Program. It's actually one of the 3 credit unions plus the big banks. But with us, we really are going to go the next step. We're going to be including a lot of just ensuring that we're not just lending, we're actually looking at the complete ecosystem and supporting community partners who are working with, especially with Black entrepreneurs. So it still hasn't been launched yet, but that is one of the things that I'm working on and that the organization is quite excited about. So yeah, I think a lot of the other things have been mentioned, but I think we're really in all, what I love is that we're all in this together, so.
Thanks, Jiri, for that. And thanks to all for sharing, what's happening within your organizations. I think really important, as many of us on the call are working in higher education, important to hear, how external organizations are working to advance these efforts and what the landscape and priorities are. Sometimes I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between, higher ed and industry. So thank you for sharing. We are running a bit short on time. I'm going to put the second question in the chat, and then I think we'll have two of you respond, and then we will go from there. So the next question I have, this CEWIL is an organization working to support work integrated learning experiences for students. And the next question is, how are you or your organization using, a lens around equity, diversity, and inclusion to support students that are involved in your organizations? Jiri, I know you ended off the last question. I'm going to have you start this question. I know Van City has a strong culture of recruiting students as interns and are really looking at their pipeline with post-secondary education. So I'll turn it over to you to respond first. You're on mute. Don't say anything else. We don't want to miss anything important.
Oh my gosh, yes. So I'll say, with Van City, we're really excited to have that internship program that we have. We pay a living wage to our students, so which is really exciting for us, and of course very meaningful for them too. And we give the opportunity to a diverse group of students and representing communities that we serve. We always have an added focus around communities that are facing obtaining meaningful employment. So from Indigenous communities, individuals with disabilities, newcomers to Canada. And so we really try to focus on those groups more, but overall they do commit 20% of their time to an initiative that actually ends up, it's called an Explorer Network Experience, where they come up with an innovative, because we know the youth are very innovative, and when you bring them into an environment like ours, they do come up with some great innovative ideas that we will get them to the next level. We know that 85% of our Van City managers who took on an intern say that they really loved the experience, and it has a great impact on their departments. And they found that they were able to be supported by the interns with the work they're doing, because we ensure that every intern we get is very closely matched with the department that they're in. So just, I know we don't have too much time, but just a quick synopsis of how our internship program works.
Thanks, Jiri. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, and then Amanda Mohammed, you'll respond to the last question, if that's all right, in terms of timing.
Sure. Obviously, Deloitte, being a very large firm, has a fairly structured recruiting process. So we have campus recruiters that work directly with various institutions at various levels. So, there's a large influx of students a couple of times a year. I think fall and the summer, and it adds a lot of energy into our offices. We have pretty structured onboarding. But I think going back to the agenda that Deloitte has about making sure that our firm has a representation or a makeup of contemporary Canada, we've realized that we have to do more and different work on the area of hiring. So, we need to think differently about that. And I spoke earlier about needing to increase our representation of all diversity groups. We have a campus inclusion team that's fairly recent, that's been starting up. But what they've been doing is meeting with various employee resource groups across the firm. So we have different groups that people can join if they're an ally or they find themselves aligned with a specific group. So, you know, Pride Community, Parents Network, Accessibility, the Canadian Black Professional Network group. So our campus inclusion team has been meeting with all those groups individually to understand how we can work together to create a more inclusive environment at the firm, and then what work we should be doing as far as recruiting inclusively. So a few of the things that they're thinking about right now is, you know, creating a recruitment diversity strategy, which looks at things like job postings, or how are we phrasing our descriptions? How are we promoting that? Who is it being promoted to, right? What campus events are we showing up at? Which groups and universities are we actually targeting? Are they the right ones for who we want to hire? You know, resume screening, are we sure that everyone that's doing that has taken an unconscious bias workshop? Are they trained? Are they the right people? Making sure that the people doing interviews are represented of a diverse background. Are we paying attention to who we're bringing in for interviews? So like I say, there's a lot of work to be done, but we're on the right track, I think. You know, again, our objective is to have a firm that mirrors contemporary society. So we have some work to do in this area.
Great, thanks, Nicole. We have one more question before we move into a broader Q&A portion. So I encourage you, if you have questions for the panelists, write those in and we will get those. The last question I'm going to put in the chat here, and I'll have Amanda and then Mohammed respond, is what are the future direction or priorities of this work within your organizations, and how might organizations continue to or initiate better partnerships with higher education institutions to advance this work? So I will turn over to Amanda and then Mohammed, and then we'll move into some questions.
So thanks again, Robin. So I'll try to keep it brief because I know we're short on time. One of the interesting things that I have a new boss this year, a new VP of People and Culture, and she's been remarking most recently as our senior executive team has decided to make equity mindedness one of our 3 top organizational priorities in the coming year. And that is so that we can enable the equity work we have to do as our responsibility in how we build relationships, invest in community, build our donor base, all of those things. And so this, we're in the midst of defining that strategic action plan related to equity that is cross-cutting in all of our other business planning. So it's really becoming embedded. And one of the things that I've looked at with the consultant we're working with on supporting this development of this work is the idea that equity is never done, right? You're never finished with equity. It's a forever kind of work to do. And so while we're setting out some objectives for this year, and I won't speak to the details, Nicole, what you've brought up are some of the things that we're looking at as well, but we're a staff team of 200, right? So you have to prioritize what you can actually do. But I will speak a little bit to like the 7 levers that we're looking at. So a lot on the internal stuff that I've already talked about. I mentioned a little bit on data. But some of the ways in which we relate to the different stakeholder groups we have. So one of the levers is around community engagement. So how do we strengthen how we engage our stakeholders around different equity issues? So for example, we hosted a recent panel on anti-Black racism. We'll be doing more of that kind of community engagement. Another lever is around how we communicate and build awareness. So in some of the stories that we share about the work that happens and the experiences of residents across the GTA, it's around like, are we sharing asset-based approaches, showing the strength of our community instead of the deficits? Another lever is public policy and advocacy. So what issues are the most critical ones to look at? If we're looking at those most disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, and we look at the recovery of our communities in Toronto and those most affected by COVID-19, And then one of the biggest ones is, of course, fundraising and community investments. So how do we diversify our donor base? And then even most recently, we've been distributing COVID emergency funding across social services. And we've been able to expand our reach and build new relationships with grassroots organizations and new partnerships with even universities. So in terms of higher education, looking at partnering to develop, we're working with U of T right now on a social justice fellowship that is around innovative cross-sectoral solutions to community issues. And it's both a learning program, but people are expected to also be working. So it's a practical application of what does it look like to address certain issues specific to equity. And right now we're going through a massive auditing process on our investment practices and how we partner with community so that we can improve those. And then the final lever is around what's our responsibility to partnering across the network of our agencies and all of our stakeholders to grow and advance equity work. So those are some of our future directions. And we often partner with higher education with different universities, whether it's looking at research, whether it's looking at learning, and of course the student placements and interns that we do take. And we really do advocate to what Jerry was talking about around fairly compensating to the living wage, how critical that is, because if you're not offering compensation, then you're not going to be able to diversify those work placements because people won't necessarily have the luxury to take on a placement if they have to be working. So we're also really conscious of how we provide people with the balance of time to do all of their work. So I'll stop there. Sorry if that was too long, but thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Okay, Mohammed, you get one or 2 minutes here to wrap us up.
Just 2 minutes, I'll promise. So first I would say is, this is our philosophy here at the St. John Newcomer Center. Students of today are leaders of tomorrow. So the more they expose they are to cultural diversity, the more they will get the opportunities to appreciate the importance of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Because without EDI, the future doesn't seem to be bright. So, and I'll just end it this way, because I can talk a lot about what students have done and how we have engaged students and what we plan to continue to engage students. But in interest of time, I'll just end it this way. So I'd like to end it with a quote from our own Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who proclaimed in 2015, "Diversity is Canada's strength." And this meaning is more special this year because we celebrate 50 years of multiculturalism policy. So what better can it be? 50 years of diversity in Canada, and I think it's only going to get stronger if we invest in today's youth and invest in today's students from higher institutions. So this is not only a call for us, this is the mantra that we live by, but I would say anybody listening to this webinar today, take this seriously, because the next 50 years are important for Canada. And guess what? Without students, we will not be able to get there.
Thanks, Mohammed. Those are all of our sort of broader questions, and thank you to all of our panelists for sharing the work that you're doing within your organizations around equity, diversity, inclusion, and supporting students. We have a few questions here, and we have 5 minutes, so I will ask some questions and have us respond. I think the first question I'm going to ask, as you know, we have 2 white women on this panel, as well as myself as a white woman moderating. I'm wondering if Amanda and Nicole, either of you would be able to speak to your experience as a white woman in this work and how you actively work to decenter yourself in it. Pretty big question, but wondering if either of you are comfortable speaking to that.
Oh, sure. I can go first. Yeah, thank you for asking. I mean, I spoke a little bit earlier to the fact that Deloitte is still working to achieve gender equality. So starting at the firm 20 years ago, I have had my own personal struggles with having my voice heard. I hope that makes me a little bit more of a supportive leader, but I think it's about making sure that every voice around the table is heard, right? That's really the challenge. We spoke a little bit about being uncomfortable and having those uncomfortable conversations. I'm an audit partner, so I work with a number of teams at a time of 2 to 8 people. So it puts me in a privileged position to be able to create that space and really understand who the people are on the team. You know, a small example would be the COVID-19 pandemic impacted different racialized groups differently. And so to create the space for those conversations and to even ask the question, I think is something that I try to do, even though they're challenging and I don't have the answers, but just to be open to debate and challenge on a daily basis.
Thanks, Nicole. Amanda?
Sure, I'll just add that I think I used to be really hesitant to want to take any type of lead role in speaking publicly about equity, or even taking that leadership role within my organization. So I've become, and I think it's partially because I was uncomfortable about talking about my whiteness. And so I think I've come to be more aware of it and really, and I'm on a learning journey to try to identify what those blind spots are that I have in order to be able to take greater responsibility. And so today in particular, it was actually me responding to the call of my colleagues who asked me to step up and take a more proactive role and speaking publicly as a white person about equity so that my Black and racialized and Indigenous colleagues didn't have to carry that burden and be tokenized for always being asked to speak on panels about equity. And so I'm in the position to enable all of my coworkers to speak publicly, whether it's with donors, whether it's with agencies, whether it's more publicly about equity. I need to model the way. And so today is also about stepping into my own discomfort and using this as an opportunity to learn.
Thanks to you both. Thank you for sharing. I think we have time. There's a few questions, but I think there's one question that I did want to ask is, can any of you share specific examples of the ways in which work integrated learning or working with students within your organization has helped contribute to your goals around equity within the broader organization?
Robin, I can talk about our broader community. So during the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of challenges around getting PPE, and PPE was really expensive. So we worked alongside with the University of New Brunswick's experiential learning program to print 3D masks, 3,000 of them that were distributed to all the neighborhoods where people were either coming from one of the isms that we normally talk about. And to overcome that, I think the students came along, formed their own group, formed their leadership team, were able to print 3,000 masks and distribute them right in the middle of the pandemic.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really powerful example. Thanks, Ahmed. Anyone else have specific examples of how you've worked with and alongside students, employees or interns or co-op students to advance sort of your broader equity diversity goals?
I'll just bring up a really quick example. We had an Indigenous intern working with our research team, and her critical lens on how we were talking about how we were investing in Indigenous serving organizations or Indigenous led organizations is really pushing the needle for it. She hasn't been with us for the last year, but her criticisms of how we were preparing information for our fundraisers and how we were working with our agencies continues to challenge how we change our practices.
That's great. Thanks, Amanda. Well, we're right at 11, so I do want to respect everybody's time. Thank you so much to everybody who's called in today. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your experiences and the work that you're doing within your organizations. We will send this recording out to all the registrants who joined us here today. And I think for all of us, so important to, I think, Nicole, you used a metaphor about voices being heard at the table, right? Important for all those voices to be heard, but also important for us to look at and be critical about whose voices are those that are being heard and whose voices are at the table and whose aren't. And is there equitable access to being at the table? And, you know, one of the other things that has come up throughout this series is, you know, the discomfort of having these conversations. And as mentioned here today, I don't think the work around equity is never done, nor do I think that we'll ever be comfortable in these conversations, but leaning into being more comfortable with the discomfort and having these conversations, I think, is important. So I consider, I want to put out there to everyone here to consider the actionable commitments that you and that we can collectively take towards creating greater equity and inclusion in our work supporting students and work integrated learning, and working with our partners to advance these efforts and these initiatives. This session today has been as much about listening as it has been about learning and moving forward into action. So thank you to everybody. This series has been really impactful and powerful, and I'm hoping that CEWIL can continue its work towards these efforts. And I know that there'll be some recommendations out of this series in helping CEWIL move forward with its equity efforts. Now I have some administrative things. Our next session with the Professional Development Committee with CEWIL Canada is a session that has limited seats with our colleague Karima Ramji on cultural intelligence. I think I have a slide here, so I'll very quickly, for those of you that are still here, if you want to register, all the information is on CEWIL's website. Let me just bring up the slide here so you have the information. That's not what you need. One moment. Oops. This is our next session. I encourage you to check out and get more information on CEWIL's website. Thank you again to all of our panelists, and thank you to the Professional Development Committee with CEWIL for their work in coordinating this. Thank you, Tracy, for helping us out today, as well as Andrew from CEWIL Canada. There's a link in the chat. We would love your feedback. The PD committee has been working hard on its efforts and initiatives to facilitate learning opportunities for its members. So please, it'll take a few minutes to complete the survey. And we look forward to continuing to be uncomfortable with you all. And if you're interested in participating in the CEWIL Professional Development Committee, send me an email. My email address is here, and we'll include it in the recording. That's all we have, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.